have both, but hi, everyone. We still have people filing in, so we'll get started in a minute. But thank you so much for coming. All right, it's 2:01 and we have a lot to cover today, so we'll get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Meg Gerald. I'm a project assistant here at ICPSR, and we are so delighted to have you join us. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording and slides will be sent to you via email. During these live presentations, please excuse cameos from K9 colleagues and other unexpected moments. We hope this doesn't happen, but if the webinar were to close unexpectedly, please reopen it from the link you used to attend this presentation. We welcome your questions. Please type in questions at any time using the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom window. A live transcript is available. To show or hide that transcript, click the up arrow on the live transcript button. Please note that for those viewing on a phone or tablet, the Zoom app currently highlights only the active speaker. The live transcript will still be available. You may need to scroll to the left or right to see the presenter or the presentation. For privacy, all participants are in listen-only mode with microphones muted, and chat between participants is unavailable. One last note, if you are posting to social media about what you learn here, please use hashtag ICPSR. Once again, this webinar will be recorded and the slides will be sent via email. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Amanda Draft is a senior data curator at ICPSR. She received her PhD from Wayne State University in sociology with specializations in gender inequality and qualitative methodology. Aubrey Garman is a lead data curator at ICPSR. She received her BA from Indiana University Southeast in sociology and psychology and has been with the curation unit since March of 2018. As part of their curation duties, Amanda and Aubrey prepare quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods data for dissemination, review deposits prior to curation, and conduct quality checks prior to a study's release. They have experience curating data across multiple content areas, including criminal justice, demography, childcare, education, drug use, the arts, and healthcare. Aubrey and Amanda recently contributed to the compilation of a guide to qualitative data curation, an internal resource to train ICPSR curators on ICPSR's standards and processes for curating qualitative data. The two received the ICPSR Innovator of the Year Award in 2022 for their efforts in creating this guide. Joy Zhang is an assistant research scientist at ICPSR and a co-director of the National Addiction and HIV Data Archive Program, or NAHDAP. She received her PhD in Human Development and Family Science from Ohio State University and completed her postdoctoral training from Youth and Social Issues Program and Social and Environmental Health Program at the Research Center at the University of Michigan. As a trained interdisciplinary quantitative methodology and survey researcher, she utilizes secondary data for her research on substance use and health over the life course. Amy Pienta is a research professor at ICPSR and leads the Business and Collection Development Unit and directs multiple data projects, including NAHDAP. She received her PhD in sociology from SUNY Buffalo and completed an NIA postdoc at Penn State. All right, I'd love to give a warm welcome to our first presenter, Amy Pienta. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome to the audience for joining us today. Next slide, please. I want to start by acknowledging the support for this presentation today. 2 NIH projects provided support, including both for this presentation and also in the preparation of the guidance that we prepared for investigators who are looking to share qualitative data. We're going to feature that in the presentation today. First is a contract from the National Institute on Drug Abuse for developing the National Addiction and HIV Data Archive Program. And as I said, this project allowed us to put together this presentation today. The second project that supported the creation of the guide was developed under a research grant from the National Human Genome Research Institute to Washington University in St. Louis, where ICPSR is a partner on that project. So the guidance we'll talk about in the presentation today is taken largely from that guide, and also, next slide, the work of the data curation unit at ICPSR, as we just heard Meg introduce. ICPSR has more than 30 data curators on staff, and while this group is mainly responsible for standardizing and improving data, they also play a large role in developing the standards that we use and follow at ICPSR, including those for qualitative data, as you just heard. So today, we're really pleased to be joined by 2 data curators, Amanda Draft and Aubrey Garman, who will talk about those standards later in the presentation. Next slide. This is the outline for the webinar. First, we'll give an introduction to the NATAP repository, but also ICPSR, which is the larger repository which hosts NATAP. Second, we'll talk about a definition of qualitative data that we use at ICPSR and provide examples of the types of qualitative data that you will find at ICPSR. We'll discuss the potential uses and reuses for the qualitative data found within the ICPSR repository at large. Next, we'll describe the steps investigators should plan for in order to deposit qualitative data with ICPSR. And we'll talk about how to designate one of the ICPSR repositories, such as NATAP, if you are putting together an NIH data management and sharing plan. Following this, Amanda and Aubrey will talk about ICPSR standards for protecting confidentiality, improving the reuse of qualitative data. And then Joy will end by talking about the practices that we require our authorized users of this data to follow to ensure that human subjects protections continue to be met. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, ICPSR hosts the NATAP archive and a number of other repositories that I'll reference throughout this presentation. Next slide. To provide context on NATAP, NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, established the NATAP program to support data sharing from projects about drug use. I want to note that NATAP data are not limited to data from persons living with HIV or at risk, but it is a subset of data that are found within the NATAP archive, hence the name. The NATAP archive has been hosted at ICPSR since 2009. The program offers a set of services designed to support investigators who want to share data, and also a set of activities that support discovery and use of this data. NATAP focuses on data from the social and behavioral domain broadly, including epidemiological studies, prevention studies, and also some clinical data when they have a significant focus on social and behavioral factors. In terms of data type, NAHDAP accepts data from surveys and interviews, but you will also find data collected using observational methods and mixed methods as well. NAHDAP supports an even wider range of qualitative and quantitative data types, and we invite you to contact us if you have any questions about whether your data might fit at NAHDAP. Finally, the NAHDAP website provides access to data currently from 587 studies that we've put together since 2009. And it's important to note that almost half of these studies contain one or more restricted use data files, which really highlights the sensitive and rich and detailed information found within the studies that we serve at NAHDAP. Next slide, please. The NAHDAP website attracted over 36,000 visitors last year, and there were 1,358 NAHDAP data packages downloaded last year. So a data package may contain many data files. Over 1,000 project teams currently are authorized to use a NAHDAP restricted data set where they access the data through a controlled access method. And we maintain a data-related bibliography for NAHDAP data, where we added 959 publications that were published in 2022 to the bibliography recently. This tool serves many purposes. It provides credit to the investigator who contributed the data to NAHDAP, but it also enhances discovery and use of the data to provide additional context around all the past uses of the data. Next slide, please. So NAHDAP is one repository located within the larger ICPSR repository. So I want to talk about that next. ICPSR has operated the data repository, or in the past, we've called it a data archive, for the social sciences since 1962. ICPSR has perhaps the largest curated collection of data. And I'll remind you that curated means that our data curation staff have taken pretty extensive steps to standardize and improve the use of that data. So it's one aspect of ICPSR that sets it apart from some of the other repositories that you might interact with. Another unique aspect of ICPSR is the scale at which we support and manage secure access to that sensitive and confidential data. So it allows us to accept a broader set of information from study teams than other repositories who don't have those access methods in their repertoire. ICPSR data meet FAIR data principles, and all data are assigned persistent identifiers. ICPSR is a core trust seal repository as well. Next slide, please. There are 4 NIH-funded data repository projects at ICPSR currently. In addition to NAHDAP, you also will find at ICPSR an NIA archive called the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging, which archives data funded by NIA. The Data Sharing for Demographic Research project funded by NICHD, which is home to population studies data. The Social, Behavioral, and Economic COVID Coordinating Center, which is funded by NIA, but really includes an archive of information and measures to different COVID research studies that are ongoing across several NIH institutes. ICPSR does include additional repositories with other sources of funding, including ICPSR itself is made up of an 800+ consortium of institutions, which allows ICPSR to support an even larger breadth of data from the broad social sciences beyond those funded at NIH. Qualitative data archiving services that we describe in this webinar applies to those wishing to use NAHDAP or one of these other NIH-funded repositories or any of the other repositories at ICPSR. Next slide, please. Each of these 4 repositories offers services to NIH investigators in their designated topical area, including allowing the deposit of study materials, but also supporting discovery of data and documentation and providing user support. Within its designated topical area, each of these 4 archives provides consultation to investigators about an NIH data management and sharing plan if you're planning to designate one of the 4 in your DMS plan. On this slide, we also provide a link to the NIH page where you can find guidance about how to designate a repository. Next slide, please. We turn next to talk about qualitative data and its potential for reuse from our perspective. Next slide, please. We use qualitative data to refer to all sorts of non-numeric forms of data that come to us at ICPSR. It commonly refers to the deposit of information, though, that are words and text in our domain. It's the bulk of what we get at ICPSR. Text may come from field notes or interview transcripts, public data sources, perhaps, or open-ended response items in surveys. Qualitative information is especially helpful to answer questions such as why and how, and to offer understanding of processes and structures for exploration, and to document phenomena that are not easily quantifiable. Mixed method studies contain both qualitative and quantitative data. And in these, qualitative data may be being used to complement the quantitative data, but also quantitative data included in a mixed method study may be used to support and complement the qualitative information. So we acknowledge both, and we have both examples in the archive. Next slide, please. We have at least 184 studies that have used a qualitative method to collect data at ICPSR, but the number of studies with qualitative components is probably much larger, especially as we've operated for over 60 years, and some of the systems we use to tag and designate these have changed over the 60+ year history. We wanted to highlight some of the qualitative data that were archived as part of the NHGRI grant that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. This project engaged with a number of NIH investigators to first identify barriers and then to create a response to those barriers so that they could share their qualitative data. And of course, much of this revolved around protecting disclosure in the qualitative files that they have. So the Washington University St. Louis team, the lead of this project, created de-identification software, which was used by 30 research teams to de-identify their data. So that was the first step. They then deposited the data into ICPSR, where we curated and released these as restricted use data sets for additional protection. One of these was a study of fentanyl risk communication containing 31 interview transcripts. Another was a study of attitudes towards medication-assisted treatment for opioid use, which contained 13 transcripts. And the last example was a study to improve opioid overdose reporting and tracking, containing 19 interview transcripts from a variety of community members. Looking more broadly across the data at ICPSR, there are text files from observations, notes, reflective writings, content analysis, and open-ended questions. But beyond that qualitative text examples, there are also video, audio, and image collections across the archives of ICPSR. Next slide, please. We think we can maximize the reuse potential of qualitative data when there is careful planning and data management practices in place, both during data collection and also during archiving. Providing best practice is followed, it means that the data can be archived, offering richness and depth for a user to make new interpretations of that data and conduct reanalysis. It can also be used to increase research transparency around qualitative studies, which is much needed. And qualitative data that are shared can offer additional context around phenomena, a subpopulation, or even a location. And finally, qualitative data in the archive can be used to support the training of the next generation of qualitative researchers. Next slide, please. Following best practice also means that it's possible to minimize things that investigators who've collected this data care very much about, such as minimizing the chance of running out of resources to prepare and share data, since that often comes later in the project. It's also possible with careful planning to minimize the potential for re-identification and manage these human subjects risks. And finally, well-documented and managed qualitative data reduce investigator concerns about misinterpretation or misuse of their data by others, which is a very big concern in the qualitative research community. Next slide, please. We'll next cover the major steps to plan and archive data at ICPSR. Next slide. The NIH-funded repositories at ICPSR provide consultation to investigators developing an NIH data management and sharing plan. We have put together a set of recommended text in a template to use in the NIH DMS plan for any investigator planning to designate one of our repositories at ICPSR for their data. And you'll find a link to that from this slide, which again will be shared at the in follow-up to this presentation. The NIH-funded repositories at ICPSR can also help estimate any costs for your proposal. And while there is no cost to deposit data into any ICPSR repository, you can include an estimated cost of our curation services, or you have the option of obtaining a letter of support from one of the NIH-funded repositories. Both are options that will allow the release data to be accessed by all users at no cost. So an estimate or a letter of support where possible. On this slide, we are also providing a link to ICPSR's cost estimation form, which makes this process a little more straightforward and easy and quick. And you also are able to find this on our website if you just search for it. We can provide guidance from our perspective about getting IRB approval for qualitative data sharing and offer ways to cover data sharing in the informed consent statements. We have many examples of these things. And more information about all of the topics where we're providing guidance can be found in a brand new guide for sharing qualitative data that is linked from this slide. And again, the output of that NHGRI project. I want to note that you're not limited to using one of the NIH-funded repositories if you are an NIH investigator. ICPSR supports the curation services for a large set of data that are available to those 800 plus institutions that make up the consortium at no cost. And if your data would not fit into one of the NIH repositories, this general ICPSR staff can help you develop a data sharing plan and plan for any costs to provide even broader free access to users. Next slide, please. Once a project is funded or ready to share data, there are roughly 5 major steps to follow when preparing to deposit that data. Next slide, please. The first step is to contact us at least 3 to 4 months ahead of any release date that you are working towards by emailing our help desk. Our staff, and the help desk email is provided on this slide. Our staff can use this time to work with you to review informed consent documents to make sure everything's in place, to start an agreement to deposit the data into the archive if the data are sensitive or restricted in any way by your institution, to review any sample files for format, appropriateness and completeness, and to answer questions as they come up. We also can review your project's data sharing timeline. And again, I want to stress that contacting us early offers the best chance of meeting any potential deadline that you have in mind with respect to making sure that your data are provided as public access data sets or with controlled access conditions on them for anything that's restricted. Next slide, please. The second step is to prepare your submission. I mentioned formats, and text data are acceptable in a wide range of formats, which are listed here. And for other non-text data, we recommend that you do reach out to us to discuss submission formats. Also, many of these qualitative collections come with some kind of tabular data. Spreadsheets are fine for that. And again, we have lots of information on our website to provide more information on how to submit any quantitative file along with your qualitative submission. In the guide for sharing qualitative data, you'll find information about how to name data files and folders and how to structure your submission. File and folder names should not contain identifying information, but they should be descriptive to make it easier to use the data. Names often make reference to sites, participant roles, or characteristics or time, for example. Those are all very helpful. And there's examples in the guide. Finally, we encourage investigators to submit a wide range of documentation, including a thorough document description of their methods, all data collection instruments, interviewer scripts and instructions, and information about how the files were de-identified before being passed to the archive. We suggest you plan 1 to 3 months for this step, but this step may require more time for a project if you've not planned and carefully executed a data management plan. We can see these things taking a lot of time for teams to put together. Next slide, please. To begin a data deposit, this third step, you will visit the NAHDAP deposit page, but each ICPSR repository offers a similar deposit page, and the ICPSR deposit page allows you to select from any hosted repository at ICPSR. So you can start at ICPSR as well. From any deposit page, you will be offered a link to start your online deposit. So that opens up a tool to help you. You will need to register an ICPSR account to be able to do this. The form will allow you to save your work and come back later. It's a little lengthy, but not too long. You're also able to add collaborators to share the work of the deposit or to review what's been put into the form. And we also encourage you to consider adding our staff that you've been interacting with if you'd like someone on our end to review your deposit as it's in progress. The form asks you to fill in a series of text fields that describe your study, its methods, and your submission. And you'll also be offered a secure upload link to add your files to the deposit form. The form does have some file size limits, but you can contact us to make arrangements for larger deposits. This is particularly true of video submissions. There are links on this page that you're seeing to the NAHDAP deposit page and the general ICPSR deposit page. Next slide. Step 4 after your submission, ICPSR or one of the NIH designated repositories will review your deposited files for completeness, to evaluate disclosure risk and potential for harm, and to ensure data quality. And Aubrey and Amanda will talk more about that. But during this step, what I wanted to stress that it's important that you're prepared to respond to any staff requests that we may make for additional information, and perhaps be prepared to make changes and resubmit the files. So in our experience, it's a good idea to build in time to on your end to be able to respond to these questions, because we find this is often the cause of lengthy delays where we cannot resolve issues that we find with a submission, which prevents us from releasing the data until we get resolution. So please do plan ahead for that. Next slide, please. The final step. And then you can hear from another member of our presentation team. The final step is where we are releasing the files, either as a public release or as a restricted release with public documentation. You and any email address that you've designated in your deposit form for notification will get one. It will come in the form of an email, and it will contain helpful information about the data release. We ask that you click on the links and review the study homepage, where you'll find the DOI and a study citation to reference your data set. And we do hope that you plan to cite the data in your own publications using this citation. It helps strengthen the use of proper data citation when you do this. The study homepage also includes an automated summary of usage statistics so that you can track any use of the data over time by visiting the page. And of course, there's also a link to the bibliography, which again will grow over time as users tell us about publications as they reused your data, or our staff goes out to find them. So with that, next slide, I will turn the presentation over to Aubrey to begin to talk about our standard for protecting confidentiality and improving reuse of qualitative data. Next slide.
Thank you, Amy. So people participate in research projects typically under an assumption that their responses will be kept confidential. And ICPSR is committed to protecting respondents' identities in the data that we share, especially qualitative data. And a way to protect respondents' identities is by minimizing their disclosure risk. Disclosure is the unauthorized release of specific information about an individual or an organization. A disclosure risk, then, is the potential harm that data could cause if participants within the data are recognizable. Disclosure risk encompasses both the risks of re-identification and of possible harm, which can range from humiliation to legal jeopardy to even death in very extreme cases. Disclosure risk review is the phrase that we use to refer to the process of reviewing data and documentation files for confidential and sensitive information, and ensuring that this information is not released to unauthorized parties. With some exceptions, ICPSR reviews all deposited data to assess their disclosure risk. Next slide, please. Depending on the outcome of the disclosure risk review, ICPSR may suggest modifying the data and/or distributing the data at a higher level of restriction. Sometimes data just cannot be modified to protect confidentiality without significantly compromising the research potential of that data. So in these cases, access to the data is restricted in order to impose further confidentiality safeguards. ICPSR has established several mechanisms by which restricted use data can be distributed. For data restricted to secure download, researchers will receive an encrypted file, which they may download to the secure location specified in their application. For data made available through the virtual data enclave, researchers are approved to access the data via a remote desktop connection. VDE users are unable to move files from that remote desktop to their own computer or to the internet. So to receive any output from the VDE, researchers must request that ICPSR conduct a disclosure review of those files. This vetting process is going to be explained in a little bit more detail later in the webinar. The physical data enclave is located on site here at the ICPSR offices in Ann Arbor, and researchers must travel to visit us in order to use the data stored here. The data in the physical enclave typically contain highly sensitive personal information or data from protected populations. Again, any PDE output is reviewed by ICPSR staff. Researchers must always apply for access to restricted data, although the application may look different depending on the project and the level of restriction. It should also be noted that a lot of the qualitative data at ICPSR tends to be designated to at least some level of restriction due to the breadth of information that is typically shared by respondents. Next slide, please. Again, ICPSR will perform a disclosure risk review on pretty much all data that we receive, but it is also important for depositors to conduct their own review prior to submitting qualitative data to archive, paying particular attention to direct and indirect identifiers. As a quick refresher for those who needs it, direct identifiers are information that point explicitly to specific individuals or organizations, such as names, personal contact information, or linkable numbers like social security numbers or driver license numbers. Basically, anything that may be considered to be personally identifiable information. Indirect identifiers can be problematic as they may be used together or with other information to re-identify individual respondents. Examples of indirect identifiers include current or former employers or job titles, educational institutions from which respondents attended, detailed income, exact dates of events, and detailed geography. Depositors should review for and remove any identifiers in a way that is consistent with relevant organizational obligations, such as with your IRB, and with the terms that participants agreed to in their informed consent. It's important to note that ICPSR may accept data that have identifying information, and we can work with data depositors to further address any disclosure risks. Disclosive information that's found during your review can be replaced in a variety of ways and depends on how much contextual information is necessary for secondary research. For example, you can replace information using a simple general descriptor like name, city, profession, etc. Alternatively, you may use more contextual descriptors to provide secondary users with more information about the respondents or the information being masked. For example, you could provide demographic information like gender, age, job title, or role of the respondent or individual names that are being masked, which you can see in the examples listed here in the slide. When you have more than one identifier of the same attribute, like multiple names, you can add subscripts to the descriptor to represent each unique individual, name 1, name 2, name 3, and so on. If the disclosive information cannot be generalized using one of the above options, the entire text may need to be removed. You can use phrases like description or redacted, or even the use of an ellipses to mask an entire block of text if necessary. But regardless of whatever strategy you use, depositors should document any modifications to mask confidential information in a way that allows us to easily review the changes and then to also communicate to users what has been replaced or masked. For example, some researchers may create a table that serves as a key to match identifiers with their replacement text, which can also then help you to provide consistency in your de-identification strategies. At a minimum, depositors should include a description of their disclosure risk review process and de-identification strategy in the study documentation, such as in a user guide or a manual, or you can provide us with this information so that we can include it in the study's metadata on the ICPSR study page. Next slide, please. So here's a very simple example of using general descriptors to de-identify qualitative data. As you can see in the original text, the respondent mentions 3 individual names, John, Jane, and Daniel. And then in the masked text, anytime the name John is used, it is masked with name 1, Jane is masked with name 2, and the single instance of Daniel is masked with name 3. This masking scheme would then want to be used throughout the rest of the transcript. The use of brackets around masked text, as is done in this example, and in the examples in the previous slide, is a fairly common practice as it helps to easily determine information that has been removed. And now I will hand it off to Amanda to talk a little bit more about what ICPSR will do to review and curate your data.
Thank you, Aubrey. So once your data are ready to be curated for our disclosure risk review, our curation staff will initially review about 10 to 15% of the total pages or the total files, depending on how they are structured, to get a sense of what the data include and how de-identified they are. So in our disclosure review, we'll take into account methodological factors such as how specific the geography is, what the sample size is, if there are relationships between participants, if there are vulnerable populations, and how sensitive the content is. So for example, if participants disclose drug use, illegal activity, or any kind of health data or criminal record data. So what is important to note is that we try to strive for a balance between the risk of disclosure or re-identification and the data utility or the data reuse. So for example, if knowing the geographical context of a study isn't crucial to understanding the participants' experiences, it's not going to make much sense to mask geography to a certain extent. So based on the data and based on the methodology used, we're going to, in our disclosure risk review, identify the most appropriate access level, as discussed earlier, and exactly how we are going to handle any identifying information that may remain in the data once it's been deposited to us. So studies that need to retain more identifiers in order to keep that data utility tend to be set at the greater restricted levels. So once our disclosure risk review is complete, we will then read all of the data files line by line, as well as the documentation to look for anything remaining that may be identifying information. So we are actually serving as an extra pair of eyes on your data, even after all of the work that you as the depositor may have done with it. And if we do find any confidential information that we've determined should be redacted, we tend to replace it with a descriptor that will include something like masked by ICPSR to distinguish the work that we've done versus what you, the depositor, have done. We'll also compile documentation as well as study metadata. So for qualitative data sets, as opposed to a traditional ICPSR codebook for quantitative data sets that you may or may not be familiar with, we actually create a README file, which will list all of the files that will be included in a data package. We intend to list them by page or line count, and any other information that, such as naming conventions that may be useful to secondary users. We'll also compile any interview guides, data remediation memos, observation log templates, any documentation that may be useful to help secondary users get a sense of what your data are about or to reuse it. As for metadata, we'll create a full description of your study. So this will include a summary or an abstract, search keywords, a description of study design and methodology, sampling, dates of data collection, and any analysis methods used or any software that might have been used, as well as coding strategies. So the metadata and documentation are important for findability and reusability of your studies. Because as Aubrey noted, a lot of our qualitative data are restricted access, users can determine if the data will be useful for them before they decide to go through the process of applying for that access by reading the documentation and metadata. So the more information you can provide us about your study, we can include that in our study's metadata on the ICPSR study page, and users can find it and learn about it, and they'll be much more likely to use it. Similarly to our quantitative studies where we offer data in different statistical packages, we'll also create a product suite with your data in PDF form, rich text format, and ASCII text versions. Alternatively, if we have things like Excel or other file types, we can release the files in the format in which they were deposited with minimal curation beyond any needed redactions based on the disclosure risk review. So I believe Joy will take the next section on how to responsibly protect data after.
Thank you, Amanda. So in earlier presentation, Aubrey and Amanda covered what disclosure and disclosure risks are. So ICPSR makes sure human subject protections during the reuse of the qualitative data. So disclosure risks review is a method to prevent disclosure of confidential information and reduce the likelihood of re-identification of study participants and provide utility to researchers wishing to disseminate results, and ensure the result of the review process maintain ethical standards for human subjects protection. At ICPSR, disclosure risks review is first used during the curation process and also use it after data is released. There are two methods of post-release disclosure risks review. First, researchers are doing self-vetting on their outputs created from public use data and securely downloaded restricted use data. Second, ICPSR staff are conducting post-release disclosure risks review on outputs created from restricted use data in virtual data enclave and physical data enclave. In the next couple slides, I will go over post-release disclosure review process on outputs created within virtual data enclave and physical data enclave. VDE and PDE data users cannot remove any outputs from the enclave without the disclosure risks review process and approval by ICPSR staff. Different projects at ICPSR may have their own requirements, but here I summarize a few general requirements and common rules with regard to the output disclosure risks review. First, virtual data enclave and physical data enclave data users need to submit a disclosure review request on their output. ICPSR may require the name of study or data that are the basis of the results. Users are also asked to provide a description of data, a description of sample or population for each part of their analysis, and a description of all analysis, including subsample analysis. This is for ICPSR vetting steps to better understand the types of qualitative data used in the output and the context of the output. Also, ICPSR may require a summary of how data users have taken steps to remove potentially identifiable information. For example, how unique characteristics of participants' attributes as well as unique combination of participants' attributes are described and identified in the output. Similar to the disclosure review at the deposit and curation process, ICPSR step check the outputs to ensure that the data is de-identified, so no individual or establishment can be identified within the output. Step look at personal or business identifying information or any specific information that may permit linkage to previously reported data or other data sources. Or dates with indirect quote or proper nouns associated with participants in the study have to be removed, as well as descriptive demographic information about participants, photos, screenshots, or excerpts. All information that could be linked within news reports or other publicly available databases should be also removed. Data users are expected to comply the rules elaborated in the Restricted Data Use Agreement and Data Security Plan. If not complied, this is considered protocol violations. The violations may include sharing your login information with other researchers and using results before they have been authorized for use by us. This includes taking notes, producing tables, or even emailing us asking questions that reference the data directly. Another protocol violation is moving institutes without providing an advance notice to NAHDAP or ICPSR, and failing to renew in advance an expiration of the agreement is also a protocol violation. All of these violations could result in immediate termination of data access. Output vetting step or its project is not the only decision-making unit or personnel, but ICPSR has a group of experts to provide advice in terms of data disclosure risks. Disclosure Review Board provides leadership and scholarly role in the disclosure review and avoidance community, and serves as a decision-making body with regard to disclosure risks and any exceptions for existing policies. Individual ICPSR output vetting step can inquire Disclosure Review Board about disclosure risks on outputs and defer the approval decision. In addition, Disclosure Review Board reviews the ICPSR disclosure rules in light of new regulation and or changes to the wider data environment and assesses new disclosure reduction methods and technologies for possible adoption and develops rules around them. Okay. Meg?
Yes. We're getting quite a few questions, and I'm going to attempt to read them and ask many of you to answer those questions as we go. And of course, I think some of them I might just go ahead and answer. So several of the questions revolve around the information we provided about estimating costs in an NIH data management and sharing plan. So one of the questions about what is the typical cost to archive data at NATAP or one of the other repositories at ICPSR. And It is true that the deposit of data is at no cost. Each of the archives at ICPSR looks at incoming data and provides resources to curate and improve the use, as Amanda and Aubrey have described. And so there are limits to some of the NIH-funded repositories about what is in scope for them or how many resources they have to do this work. And so we recommend that either you contact that repository to get an early determination on whether they would be able to support your data and then get a letter of support for this, or to go ahead and plan to estimate the cost of the services, but still work with that repository. And so that is also possible. In terms of the typical costs, the cost form that we provide a link to in this presentation will lead to two endpoints. One is for very standard qualitative data submissions, which you can find more information in that form about what defines that. We provide a standard cost that you may use in your NIH application or any grant application for that matter, to cover the cost of those curation services. And if you have a non-standard qualitative submission, and that's one that is large volumes of text, video information, basically something that is one where you're asking us to do a full mitigation of any kinds of disclosure risks in the file instead of having taken a pass at you having taken a pass at doing that. Those are the kinds of additional services that may increase costs beyond the standard. So that form is your starting point to make that determination, and conversations with us help us determine if you need to include any costs at all. I hope that answers several of the questions that I see in the Q&A. I wanted to read a question that perhaps Aubrey or Amanda might answer, which is how metadata for qualitative data differ from quantitative data. Are there different kinds of metadata for qualitative data that you encounter?
Amanda.
One major difference is that with qualitative data, there aren't, concrete variables. So in our fields, we typically have a field for describing different variables. So for qualitative data, what we'll do instead there is we'll talk about or describe the interview themes or different questions that interviewers were asked to give input on, as opposed to distinct variables.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of information metadata describing, the study methodology, that's going to look really similar to your quantitative. Qualitative data obviously doesn't always come with a code book that provides those lists of variables or case counts. So any type of information that you can provide about, what type of how you did your sampling, what the response rate was, all of that kind of information is really useful so that we can include that and provide all of that information then to secondary users.
We also tend to get from qualitative researchers, we can get a code book, or they will offer a code book showing the different themes that if they use a thematic use technique to code, they'll have the themes listed in a description of the theme. So that is also very helpful.
Thank you very much. There is also a sub-question here, again, about cost, about whether if you are submitting data that would be de-identified public use data versus restricted data, would those estimated costs differ where they are applicable? And maybe here too, I might take a pass at answering this, but perhaps our curators can provide some additional context to this question as well. So these costs are really covering these data curation costs that ICPSR is encountering, this disclosure review and the quality checking and the review of that full set and package that you've submitted to ICPSR. And so whether the data are intended for public use or restricted use generally doesn't have a large impact on the work that we will do. We will still do a disclosure review, whether the data are going to be public use or not. The one small difference there is that we sometimes are in the position of making those substitutions and changes ourselves. And so for a file that is going to be public use, obviously the amount of replacements that we talked about in this presentation are much larger. And so there may be some additional cost for public use data, not restricted use data, because we would have to make additional modifications to those files in order to release it as public use data. But that said, I think Aubrey and Amanda both pointed out that most of these collections really wouldn't lend themselves to getting much use if we were to redact them so much. And because we are trying to balance data utility, really one of the restricted access methods is likely to be a better fit for the data anyway. But there would not be any additional cost to put into your proposal if that was the plan. There is a really great question about data collected from AIAN populations, asking if there's ways to include tribal consultation in any request to use those data. And that's a question near and dear to our hearts at ICPSR. We do have several AIAN collections, data collections, where we do involve tribal consultation prior to a user making a request to access the data from ICPSR itself or from one of its archives. And so we require people to first get that tribal review and come to us with that in hand. And then knowing that it is acceptable to the tribal consults that have been put together for that study, we would then do our usual review of the applicant to make sure that they meet our other standards for accessing the data. Great question. Thank you for that. Another question, I think, for either Aubrey or Amanda, what kinds of files or information are most useful for your work in curation when it comes to qualitative data? Perhaps you've answered that, but if there's anything to add from your last question, we'd love to hear it.
I think I'd really like to stress the importance of explaining how your study contents is organized, or like your file folder structure of your deposit, especially if you're working with mixed methods and have both quantitative and qualitative. Organizing your folder in a way that is easy for us to understand how the files are connected to each other, or even providing like a README that describes the contents of your deposit, that explains like these, this group of qualitative transcripts refer to this quantitative data set, and information like that. That way we're not making any guesses or having to come back to you with our questions about like, how do these relate, or what do these files represent? Anything that really provides that clarity for us and explains it for us.
Great, thank you. It is really helpful. And then let's see, I think there's one more question here at least. So there's a question here about how researchers can more easily de-identify their data. In the middle of the presentation within Aubrey and Amanda's slides, there was a little note that was directing you to a tool that is useful for doing that kind of anonymization of qualitative data. The NHGRI funded qualitative data sharing project that I talked about, Washington University in St. Louis developed a tool that does that and does it quite well for the HIPAA identifiers that are common in files and some additional identifying information as well. Investigators can use that tool to make those replacements and in the format that you learned about in this presentation. And so that machine learning tool offers really great information to the researcher about things that might be questionable and things that ought to be replaced. And so it does automate that process and make it a little bit easier. If you follow the link on that slide to the website for the Quads tool, it's called, you will find information about how to access that tool. It's currently transitioning from WashU to a commercial vendor. And there will soon be information about how to get access to that tool yourself. And we are eager to also use it at ICPSR as it will be helpful to our data curators to review the files that we are getting as well. So please do check that out. So one final note, we will be making these slides available to the people who registered for this webinar and providing a link to our YouTube channel where the webinar will be posted. So give us a few days or a little bit of time to prepare the transcripts from this webinar, but you will be getting all of those links and information shortly. But I think we've answered most of the questions, but we do, again, encourage you to reach out to us and talk to us directly, either through the ICPSR support email. That team will get your questions to the people on this call if you list our names or projects. And we want to thank you for being a great audience and attentive audience. Lots of people stayed on from beginning to end. We really do appreciate that. And thank you. And we will see you soon. Bye-bye.